It is August 7th, and on this date in 1782, America's first military commendation was created with the general orders of the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. But that award was very nearly forgotten, almost lost to history. The history of the badge of military merit deserves to be remembered. George Washington had put significant effort into protecting and preserving his correspondence during both the American War for Independence and papers from his term in office as the first President of the United States. He appreciated the potential historical value of his papers, and in a letter in 1797 expressed a desire to erect a building on his estate at Mount Vernon for the accommodation and security of my military, civil, and private papers, which are voluminous and may be interesting. But apparently he never accomplished the goal of building that building. When he died on December 14th, 1799, according to a publication of the Manuscript Division of the Library of Congress, in his will he bequeathed to his nephew, Bushrod Washington, eldest son of his favorite brother John Augustine, all the papers in my possession which relate to my civil and military administration of the affairs of this country, and also such of my private papers as are worth preserving. 32-year-old Bushrod Washington was a veteran of the U.S. War for Independence who in 1798 had been appointed as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He made some attempts to organize the papers, numbering in the tens of thousands, which he intended to publish, but Justice Washington was unable to complete the project before his passing in November 1829. In his will, he bequeathed the papers to his nephew, George Corbin Washington, a member of Congress from Maryland. In 1833, the U.S. Secretary of State, Louis McLean, recognized the paper's value and sought an appropriation from Congress to acquire the papers from Congressman Washington. An appropriation of $25,000 was approved by Congress on June 26, 1834. The papers were then held by the U.S. State Department, where the Library of Congress notes that they were used by various persons from time to time. In 1902, following a reorganization and construction of a new building, the papers were transferred from the State Department to the Library of Congress. Astoundingly, more than a century after the first president's passing, no concerted effort had been made to collect copies of all his existing papers. That responsibility would fall to archivist John Clement Fitzpatrick. As part of the reorganization of the Library of Congress in 1897, a manuscripts division had been created, and Fitzpatrick was named assistant chief of the division in 1902. Under his hands, the American Antiquarian Society wrote in its Proceedings in 1940, the Manuscripts Division grew to be one of the world's great collections of source materials. Fitzpatrick edited and published works from Washington's letters, as the library sought to assemble photocopies of Washington manuscripts in other institutions and in private hands in order to supplement the Washington papers. In 1928, Fitzpatrick resigned from the Library of Congress to take a position as the editor for the United States George Washington Bicentennial Commission of the writings of George Washington from the original manuscript sources, 1745 to 1799. Those papers were published by the authority of Congress in 39 volumes between 1931 and 1944, although Fitzpatrick would not survive to see all the papers published. The Antiquarian Society notes that when he died in February 1940, 26 volumes of the writings were published, and the remaining 11 were in page proof. It was through his work that a nearly forgotten part of U.S. military history was rediscovered. The Baltimore Sun wrote on February 23, 1930, "It was in the course of working over this material that John C. Fitzpatrick came upon the story of the Badge of Military Merit, the Order of the Purple Heart. Today, only a very few persons have ever heard of the Badge of Military Merit," the Sun reported. "Histories do not mention it. Historians, for the most part, have never come upon it. And those who do know of this decoration know of it only because Mr. Fitzpatrick was interested enough to search out all he could find out about it and write about it, romantically referring to it for the first time as the Order of the Purple Heart." What Fitzpatrick had uncovered were long-forgotten general orders from August 7, 1782. The orders created two types of recognition for soldiers of the Continental Army. The first set regarded years of service. Non-commissioned officers and soldiers of the Army who have served more than 3 years with bravery, fidelity, and good conduct were allowed to wear honorary badges of distinction in the form of a single chevron, a narrow piece of white cloth of an angular form to be fixed to the left arm of the uniform coat. Those who had served for 6 years are to be distinguished by 2 pieces of cloth set in parallel to each other in a similar form. Washington noted that should any who are not entitled to these honors have the insolence to assume the badges of them, they shall be severely punished, and that on the other hand, it is expected that those gallant men who are thus designated will on all occasions be treated with particular confidence and consideration. The orders then went on to establish another type of award. The general, ever desirous to cherish virtuous ambition in his soldiers, as well as to foster and encourage every species of military merit, directs that whenever any singularly meritorious action is performed, the author of it shall be permitted to wear on his facings over the left breast the figure of a heart in purple cloth or silk, edged with narrow lace or binding. This was a particular type of award, as the website of the U.S. Army notes. The badge specifically honored the lower ranks, where decorations were unknown in contemporary European armies. Washington wrote, "The road to glory in a patriot army and a free country is thus open to all." The idea of an official reward for military conduct was certainly not new. Medals of American Press, which specializes in the most up-to-date and authoritative military awards and insignia books ever written on United States, United Nations, and South Vietnamese awards, notes on their website that the beginning of military awards can be traced to the ancient Egyptians and the Greeks, but the Roman legions were the first to organize an award system honoring their soldiers for bravery and service. In fact, the badge of military merit was not the first decoration to be given within the Continental Army. The website, the Smithsonian Institution, notes that on March 20th, 1776, General George Washington wrote to the Continental Congress declaring his victory over General Howe and the retreat of the British from Boston Harbor. The following day, Secretary John Adams enthusiastically proposed a gold medal be awarded to Washington for his successful leadership. The medal was authorized by Congress on March 25th for Washington's wise and spirited conduct. This was the first of the Congressional Gold Medals, commemorative medals that, according to the Congressional Research Service, as initially conceived, were awards imbued with the conviction that only the very highest achievements were entitled to such a distinction, and that the value of a reward is enhanced by its rarity. As the U.S. did not yet have a mint, the striking of the medals themselves proved difficult, as the Smithsonian explains. The medal's design and production was as messy as the early battles of the Revolution. It took 2 failed committees, a failed design, and at least 14 years before Washington would receive his medal, the 6th Comita Americana, produced despite being the first commissioned. These were, however, not regular military decorations. They're considered a civilian award. Each is awarded by a specific act of Congress, and in fact, such medals have been awarded to the current day, with the most recent being medals awarded to Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley in January 2023. But during the period of the War for Independence, these medals, called Comitia Americana, Latin for American Congress, were only awarded to high military officers, commemorating substantial victories. They did not offer the opportunity for officers of the Army to recognize heroism by regular soldiers. Still, there were medals struck for regular soldiers prior to Washington's creation of the Award of Military Merit. The website intel.gov, the official website of the American intelligence community, explains that in 1799, the 29-year-old British Major Andre began a secret correspondence with American General Benedict Arnold. The following year, Arnold was placed in command of West Point, a defensive post located on the Hudson River, just 60 miles north of New York City. The British were aiming to seize control of the region, effectively cutting off New England from the other colonies. By that time, Arnold, a hero of previous battles, was feuding with the Continental Congress and souring on the American cause. He was also on the cusp of financial ruin due to his wife's extravagant lifestyle. In a midnight meeting with Andre at a house on the banks of the Hudson River, Arnold agreed to surrender West Point to the British for £20,000, an amount equal to nearly $4 million in today's currency. Arnold provided sensitive notes about the West Point fortifications, which Andre hid in his boot. On his return to British headquarters, Andre was captured by 3 local American militia, who discovered the incriminating documents. As Congress later noted, notwithstanding the large bribes offered to them for his reliefs, notably disdaining to sacrifice their country for the sake of gold, secured and conveyed him to the commanding officer of the district, whereby the dangerous and traitorous conspiracy of Benedict Arnold was brought to light, the insidious designs of the enemy baffled, and the United States rescued from impending danger. Major Andre was captured and hanged as a spy. In recognition of their alert action, on November 3, 1780, the Continental Congress authorized a special medal to the 3 militiamen, Privates John Paulding, David Williams, and Isaac Van Wart of the New York Militia. The legislation read, ordered that each of them receive annually out of the public treasury $200 in specie, or an equivalent in the current money of these states, during life, and that the Board of War procure for each of them a silver medal, on one side which shall be shielded with the inscription Fidelity, and on the other side the following motto, Vincit, Amor, Patriae, or the love of country conquers. The Fidelity Medallion, however, was never again awarded. The website Revolutionary Wear explains it quickly became regarded as a commemorative decoration. And thus the badge of military merit is generally considered to be the first true military decoration of the young nation. But why did Washington create an award just for lower enlisted men? And why did he wait until well into the conflict before he did so? The first military decoration of the United States, it seems, was created as a result of the parsimony of the Continental Congress. The Baltimore Sun reports. Washington, in previous orders of the day, had listed the promotions and commissions that had been granted. But no commissions were ordered on August 7th, only a short time before Congress had ruled that no more officers were to be commissioned by the generals of the Army. Money had become scarce. Prior to 1782, if an enlisted man distinguished himself, then a general officer could reward him by giving him a promotion to officer, increasing his status and pay. But Congress could no longer afford to pay more officers. Thus, the Sun writes, the only recognition which Washington and his generals had been able to bestow for unusual bravery and service had been removed from their power. Out of this poverty for rewards for distinguished service, there was born an Order of Valor, save for the Cross of St. George of Russia, the oldest decoration for gallantry and bravery known, and the first to be truly democratic in its spirit. The Purple Heart denied rank or social distinction as playing any part in heroic action. As a specific nod to the loss of the power to promote men to officer rank, Washington's general order noted, men who have merited this last distinction to be suffered to pass all guards and sentinels which officers are permitted to do, thus allowing those with the small cloth Purple Heart worn over their left breast to pass sentries as if they were an officer. While the order came late in the war, the Continental Army was disbanded just 2 years later. Washington decreed that this order also to have retrospect to the earliest stages of the war and to be considered as a permanent one. So how many soldiers received this award? That is, sadly, unknown. The general order stipulated that before this favor can be conferred on any man, the particular fact or facts of which it is to be grounded must be set forth to the commander-in-chief, accompanied with certificates from the commanding officers of the regiment and brigade to which the candidate for reward belonged, or other incontestable proofs. And upon granting it, the name and regiment of the person with the action so certified are to be enrolled in the Book of Merit, which will be kept at the orderly office. But sadly, the Book of Merit has not survived, the Sun reports. The Book of Merit has never been seen since the names of those of Purple Heart were enrolled on it. No trace, no mention of it comes down to these days. It may have been mutilated, carelessly destroyed, lost when so many of the government's records were burned in Washington during the War of 1812, or it may have just been misplaced, lost somewhere in those several miles of shelving in the Army Munitions Building in Washington, where the Adjutant General's office stores the military records of the United States. So when I say history deserves to be remembered, I mean that there is always the very real possibility that important history, like the comprehensive list of deeds and men who were awarded America's first medal for meritorious service, can be simply lost, still missing to this day. But the names are not entirely forgotten. The Sun writes, there are the names of 3 recipients in the briefest accounts of the acts which won them the honor, and in the historical collection of the New Hampshire chapter of the Order of Cincinnati is an unidentified uniform with a Purple Heart. The website of the United States Army writes, Sergeant Elijah Churchill was a 32-year-old carpenter from Enfield who entered the 8th Connecticut as a private on July 7th, 1775. He was cited for gallantry in action at Fort St. George near Brookhaven on Long Island, at Coram, New York in November 1780, and at Tarrytown, New York in July 1781. The former action was a raiding party against a Loyalist outpost and storage depot on Long Island. The Sun writes, Sergeant Churchill that night, with 16 men, went ahead of the main attack, surprised, took, and burned Fort St. George, and assisted in the burning of a British supply schooner anchored close to shore, and captured 50 prisoners. And the latter mention was for another night raid undertaken by the sergeant, this time against Fort Salonga on Long Island, where more prisoners and supplies were captured. The Army website continues. A native of Stamford, William Brown enlisted in the 5th Connecticut Regiment as a corporal on May 23, 1775. No record of his citation has been uncovered, but it is believed that he participated in the assault on Redoubt No. 10 during the Siege of Yorktown. Perhaps the most extraordinary story was that of Sergeant Daniel Bissell, Jr., originally enlisted as a fifer in the 8th Connecticut Regiment. The Sun explains that in August of 1871, Washington sent for young Bissell, having been assured that he might be entrusted with the most important of services, and asked him to go within British lines to New York City and there obtain information about British operations. The young man must have known the risk he was taking, given the final punishments of Major Andre and American spy Nathan Hale. His tale was one as exciting as any modern spy novel. After spending a year gathering intelligence behind enemy lines, he fell ill with a fever, and in his fevered state, the Sun writes, Bissell raved in delirium and babbled enough of his story for one of the doctors attending him to guess his secret. Luckily, the doctor chose not to turn him in, and after his recovery, helped him to escape and bring the intelligence he had collected to General Washington. William Brown moved to Ohio after the war, where by some accounts he served with General Mad Anthony Wayne in the 1794 Battle of the Fallen Timbers. Passed away October 23, 1804. Elijah Churchill moved to Massachusetts after the war. Passed away April 11, 1841, and Daniel Bissell continued in the Army, clear until the quasi-war with France, eventually achieved the rank of lieutenant. He passed away on August 21, 1824. Of the original badges, only 2 are known to exist. The one held by the American Independence Museum, which is in Exeter, New Hampshire, might have been the one that was awarded to William Brown, although that's not certain. And in 1961, a Michigan farmer who claimed to be the great-grandson of Sergeant Churchill wrote to a New York Historical Society saying that he had his great-grandfather's badge. And that badge is now on display at the National Temple Hill Association in Bales Gate, New York. While not officially discontinued, the Badge of Military Merit fell into disuse after the war. But in January 1931, U.S. Army Chief of Staff General Douglas MacArthur directed that a bill be sent to Congress to revive the Medal of Military Merit. The resulting medal, officially issued on the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth, and designated as the successor to the Medal of Military Merit, is today known as the Purple Heart. It's simply not known for certain if these 3 men from Connecticut were the only ones to have been awarded the Badge for Military Merit, if there are others whose records were simply lost or forgotten. There are a handful of discharge records that suggest that some other people received something called a Award of Merit, but it's not really clear if that was the Badge of Military Merit or something else. Maybe someday Washington's Book of Merit will be rediscovered somewhere in some dusty archive. But unless and until then, we are left to wonder what deeds of the early heroes of the American War for Independence have been lost to history. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.